the sound of splintering wood tiers through the pre-dawn silence of the quiet residential neighborhood. It's 5:00 a.m. when the battering ram crashes through Shanice Robinson's front door with explosive force. Police. Search warrant. 8 SWAT officers in full tactical gear flood into the home. Assault rifles raised, laser sights cutting through the darkness. Shanice jolts awake in her bedroom, heart hammering against her ribs as boots thunder up her stairs. She stumbles down the staircase in her robe and pajamas, hands shooting up above her head instinctively. "There's been a mistake," she shouts, her voice steady despite the terror. "I'm alone here, I'm not armed." Captain Marcus Webb storms toward her, weapon aimed at her chest. "On the ground now!" Shanice keeps her hands high, her eyes scanning the chaos of her violated home. "I'm a federal judge, please check your warrant. This is 3240, you want 3420. Webb's face reddens with fury. "Stop resisting." Shanice's voice rises with desperate clarity. "I'm not resisting. My hands are up. Please just check the address." Lieutenant Sarah Morrison glances at her clipboard, her expression flickering with uncertainty. "Captain..." She might be right about Webb, cuts her off with a savage gesture. "Secure the suspect." Shanice stands frozen in her own living room, hands stretched toward the ceiling, palms open and empty. Her legs are trembling from holding the position, her body beginning to sway slightly. "Show me your hands." Webb screams again, though they're already visible above her head. Shanice's face shows pure confusion. "My hands are up. What do you want me to—" Her left leg buckles slightly from the strain, and she shifts her weight to catch her balance. It's barely a movement, just a natural adjustment to keep from falling. Webb's eyes go wide. "Gun!" The word is barely out of his mouth when 6 shots explode through the room in rapid succession. 3 bullets tear through Shanice's shoulder, leg, and abdomen. 3 more punch massive holes in the wall behind her, sending eruptions of white plaster and wooden splinters exploding across the hardwood floor. The destruction is catastrophic, chunks of wall, the size of fists, scattered everywhere, gaping wounds in the structure revealing the wooden frame beneath. Shanice collapses, blood spreading rapidly across her robe as she hits the floor. Officer David Parker, the youngest member of the team, lowers his weapon with shaking hands, his voice barely a whisper. "Captain, there's no gun. There's nothing." Webb's gaze sweeps across the immaculate home, the carefully arranged furniture, the professional photographs on the walls. Then he sees them, the framed diplomas. Shanice Robinson, Juris Doctor, Harvard Law. Below it, another frame. Appointed Federal District Judge, United States District Court. The color drains from Webb's face as the magnitude of what he's done crashes over him. "Oh God," he breathes, the weapon falling to his side. "Oh God, no." The chaos that follows happens in slow motion. Morrison barks orders into her radio, her voice cracking. "Officer down. We need paramedics at 3240 Oakwood Drive now." Parker drops to his knees beside Shanice, his hands hovering uselessly over her wounds, afraid to touch them. "She's bleeding out," he shouts, his young face pale with shock. "Do something." 2 more officers rush in with the medical kit, but their training feels inadequate for the carnage before them. One of them, Officer James Wilson, begins applying pressure to the shoulder wound while his partner works on her leg. The abdomen wound is the worst, deep, ragged, bleeding profusely. Shanice's eyes flutter open for a moment, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Document," she whispers, so quietly that only Wilson hears her. "Document everything, evidence." Wilson meets her eyes, and something passes between them, a moment of recognition, of understanding. He'd testified in her courtroom 3 months ago as an expert witness on a use-of-force case. He'd watched her meticulously examine every piece of evidence, every photograph, every body cam frame. He knows exactly what she's telling him. His hand moves to his phone and he begins taking photographs. The 6 massive holes in the wall, the scattered debris. Shanice's hands, palms still facing upward where they fell, clearly empty. The distance between her and the officers. Every angle, every detail. Webb finally snaps out of his paralysis. "What are you doing? Put that phone away." Wilson doesn't stop. "He's documenting the scene, Captain," Morrison says quietly, her own face ashen. "Standard procedure for officer-involved shooting." Webb's mouth opens to protest. but the wail of approaching sirens cuts him off. Within 90 seconds, paramedics burst through the shattered doorway. The lead paramedic, James Taylor, takes one look at the victim and freezes. "Oh my God, that's Judge Robinson. That's the federal judge." The words hang in the air like an indictment. Webb staggers backward, his hand going to his forehead. "No, no." That's not his voice trails off as he looks again at the diplomas, at the photographs of Shanice in her judicial robes, shaking hands with senators and Supreme Court justices. Taylor and his team work with practiced efficiency, starting IVs, stabilizing her neck, preparing her for transport. "She's lost a lot of blood," Taylor says grimly. "We need to move now." As they lift Shanice onto the stretcher, her eyes open again just for a second and lock onto Webb's. Even through the haze of pain and blood loss, there's something in that gaze that makes him want to look away. Not anger, not fear. Something worse. Recognition. She knows exactly who he is. If you believe that no one should be shot in their own home for a police mistake, type justice below. Then comment your country and city. Let's see where people stand against no-knock raids worldwide. Your participation shows that our homes should be sanctuaries, not war zones. The ambulance screams away into the early morning darkness, leaving Webb standing in the wreckage of Judge Robinson's living room. Around him, his team moves in stunned silence. Their training taking over even as their minds struggle to process what just happened. Morrison approaches him, her voice low. "Captain, we need to secure the scene and start incident reports." Webb nods mechanically, but his eyes are fixed on something across the room. It's a photograph on the wall, partially obscured by one of the bullet holes. Shanice Robinson in her judicial robes, standing in a courtroom. Behind her, visible through the hole in the glass frame, is the seal of the United States District Court. The same court where just yesterday she'd sat in judgment. The same court where she'd denied 14 of Webb's warrant requests over the past year, each time with the same meticulous explanation: insufficient probable cause, unreliable informant, constitutional concerns. Parker is sitting on the floor now, his back against the wall, his hands still shaking. "We just shot a federal judge," he says to no one in particular, "in her own home, because she adjusted her balance." The words seem to echo in the destroyed living room, bouncing off the bullet-riddled walls. Morrison's phone rings. She answers, listens, and her face goes even paler. "Yes." "Sir, understood." She hangs up and turns to Webb. "That was the chief. U.S. Marshals are on their way. Protocol when a federal judge is attacked." Webb's head snaps up. Attacked? She wasn't. She was the victim. Morrison's expression is unreadable. "I know that, Captain, but they don't know what happened yet, and when they find out, the sentence hangs unfinished in the air, heavy with implication." At Mercy General Hospital's trauma center, the surgical team is already scrubbed and ready when the ambulance screams into the bay. Judge Robinson is wheeled directly into OR3, where Dr. Sarah Bennett and her team are waiting. 3 GSWs, Taylor reports breathlessly as they transfer Shanice to the operating table. Shoulder, leg, abdomen. BP dropping. She's lost over 2 liters. "Move, doctor." Bennett orders, and the organized chaos of emergency surgery begins. Back at 3240 Oakwood Drive, the scene has transformed into something that looks more like a military operation than a police investigation. Yellow crime scene tape cordons off the entire property. 2 black SUVs pull up, and 4 agents in dark suits step out. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair, flashes her credentials to the officer at the perimeter. "Agent Rachel Torres, U.S. Marshal Service. We're taking over this scene." Webb steps forward, trying to assert some control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Captain Marcus Webb. This is my jurisdiction, Agent Torres. I'm aware of who you are, Captain." Torres cuts him off, her voice ice cold. "And I'm aware that you just shot a federal judge 6 times in her own home at 5 in the morning. So no, this is not your jurisdiction anymore. This is a federal investigation into an attack on a federal official. Step back." The word attack makes Webb's jaw clench. It wasn't an attack. It was a justified use of force during the execution of a valid warrant. Torres raises one eyebrow. "Valid warrant?" She pulls out her phone and taps the screen a few times. Let me read you something, Captain. This warrant, allegedly signed by Judge Anderson in County Court B, authorized a raid on 3420 Oakwood Drive, the apartment of alleged drug dealer Marcus Thompson. She looks up. You raided 3240, different address, different person. And Judge Anderson is currently on vacation in Florida. He hasn't signed any warrants in 10 days. The silence that follows is deafening. Morrison's face has gone from pale to grey. Captain, she whispers, her voice trembling. That can't be right. We verified Torres's phone is already out again, making a call. This is Torres. I need a full forensic analysis on a warrant submitted to the task force. Priority 1. Possible forgery. She listens for a moment. Yes, I'm serious. A federal judge just got shot because of it. The prosecution's medical expert, Dr. Sarah Bennett, takes the stand to describe Shanice's injuries in clinical detail. 3 gunshot wounds. The shoulder wound fractured her scapula and damaged her rotator cuff. The leg wound shattered her femur, requiring extensive surgical repair with plates and screws. The abdominal wound perforated her intestines in 3 places, causing massive internal bleeding and requiring emergency surgery to prevent septic shock. Dr. Bennett shows the jury surgical photographs. Several jurors look away. Parker, still sitting against the wall, suddenly speaks up. His voice is quiet but clear in the tense atmosphere. I saved my body cam footage, all of it, before the captain could ask me to delete it. Every head in the room turns toward him. Webb's face flushes dark red. Why would you think I'd ask you to delete it? Parker meets his gaze steadily. Because you told Officer Williams to delete his footage after the Jenkins raid last month. When we hit the wrong apartment and tased that 70-year-old veteran with dementia, you said it would protect the department from frivolous lawsuits. The federal agents exchange glances. Torres approaches Parker slowly, like she's afraid he might bolt. Officer Parker, is it? David. Sir. David, I need you to secure that footage for me right now. Can you do that? Parker nods and pulls out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. I already uploaded it to a secure server when we were waiting for the paramedics. I'm sending you the access codes now. Webb takes a step toward Parker, his hands clenched into fists. You had no authority. Morrison steps between them. Captain, just don't. The federal agents are watching this exchange with intense interest, and Torres makes a note on her tablet. Captain Webb, I need you and your entire team to surrender your weapons and body cam footage immediately. This is now a federal investigation into potential civil rights violations, and all evidence must be preserved. The team begins the process of surrendering their equipment. The metallic sounds of magazines being removed and slides being locked back, filling the uncomfortable silence. Torres's phone rings. She steps away to answer it, and when she returns, her expression has hardened even further. Judge Robinson is out of surgery. She's alive but critical. She's also conscious and asking to see the warrant. Webb's stomach drops. The warrant that doesn't exist. You mean? Torres's smile is sharp and humorless. Oh, the warrant exists, Captain. The question is who created it. Because Judge Anderson didn't sign it, the address is wrong, and the suspect you were supposedly looking for doesn't exist. Morrison's voice is barely audible. What do you mean, doesn't exist? Torres pulls up something on her tablet and turns it toward them. Marcus Thompson. Alleged drug dealer at 3420 Oakwood Drive. According to property records, 3420 Oakwood is a vacant lot. Has been for 6 months, ever since the building burned down. There is no apartment. There is no Marcus Thompson, not at that address anyway. So someone created a completely fictitious warrant to justify a raid on 3240. Judge Robinson's address. The address of the federal judge who has denied more of your department's warrant requests than any other judge in the district over the past year. The implication hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. Parker's voice cuts through the silence again. Captain Webb was angry about Judge Robinson last week. He said she was making it impossible to do our jobs. He said judges who denied warrants needed to learn respect for law enforcement. Several other officers nod slowly, confirming Parker's statement. Torres makes another note. Captain Webb, you're being placed on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. You're to have no contact with any member of your team, no access to department computers or files, and you will surrender your badge and service weapon. Webb's face goes through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, a kind of desperate resignation. This is wrong. This is completely wrong. I was doing my job. You shot a federal judge 6 times based on a falsified warrant at an address that doesn't match your target, Torres says flatly. If that's doing your job, Captain, then your job is a federal crime. As Webb is escorted out by federal agents, Morrison stands in the middle of the destroyed living room, looking at the 6 massive holes in the wall. Behind her, forensic teams are beginning their meticulous documentation of the scene. Every bullet hole, every blood spatter, every piece of evidence that will paint a picture of what happened in this room at 5:00 a.m. What Webb didn't know was that James Wilson, the officer who documented everything, had testified as an expert witness in Judge Robinson's courtroom 3 months earlier. He'd watched her spend 45 minutes examining every angle of a body cam video, zooming in on details that other judges would have missed, asking questions that exposed holes in the prosecution's narrative. He knew exactly how meticulous she was about evidence, and he'd made absolutely sure she would have all the evidence she'd need. At the hospital, Judge Shanice Robinson lies in the ICU, tubes and monitors creating a mechanical symphony around her bed. Despite 3 hours of surgery and massive blood loss, her mind is already working. When her colleague, Judge Robert Hayes, arrives at 9:00 a.m., her first words are, "Tell me you brought the warrant." Hayes pulls out a folder and hands it to her. "The nurses tried to stop me from giving you work documents. I told them you'd sue the hospital if they didn't let me." Shanice manages a weak smile despite the pain medication. "You know me well." She opens the folder with her uninjured hand, her eyes scanning the document with laser focus. Even through the morphine haze, her legal mind is sharp. This signature isn't Judge Anderson's. I've seen his signature hundreds of times on warrant approvals and denials. This doesn't match his formation of the capital A or the way he crosses his T's. Hayes leans closer. "How can you be sure?" Shanice's finger traces the signature shakily. Anderson has arthritis in his right thumb. It affects how he grips the pen. You can see it in a slight tremor at the beginning of each stroke. This signature is too smooth, too confident. And look at the date format. Anderson always writes out the full month name, because he says numerical dates are ambiguous in legal documents. This just says 3/15/24. He didn't sign this. A knock at the door interrupts them. Agent Torres enters, followed by 2 FBI forensic document examiners. "Judge Robinson, I'm Agent Torres. I know this isn't a good time, but we need your expertise." Shanice's eyes sharpen despite her exhaustion. "You're investigating the warrant. Good. Because whoever created this didn't just make a mistake, they committed a federal crime. And I want to know who." The forensic examiners set up their equipment, photographing the warrant under different light spectrums. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Patricia Walsh, looks up from her magnifying glass with a grim expression. Judge Robinson is correct. This signature was created using a stamp or digital copy, not an original signing. And there's more. See this coffee stain in the corner? Dr. Walsh pulls up a file on her laptop. This is a warrant that Judge Anderson actually signed 2 weeks ago in an unrelated case. Same coffee stain pattern. Someone photographed or scanned one of his real warrants, then digitally altered it to create this one. Torres makes notes rapidly. So we're looking at forgery, identity fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The question is, who had access to Judge Anderson's signed warrants to create the forgery? Shanice's voice is hoarse but steady. Someone in the court system. Someone who handles warrant paperwork regularly. Clerk's office, maybe. Or law enforcement, someone who submits warrants frequently enough to have access to examples of Anderson's signature. Hayes pulls out his phone. "I'm calling an emergency meeting of the federal judiciary for this district. This isn't just about you, Shanice. This is about the integrity of the entire warrant system. If someone is forging judicial signatures, every warrant issued in the past year is now suspect." Shanice nods, then winces at the pain the movement causes. "Robert, I need you to do something else. Pull every warrant request submitted by Captain Webb's unit for the past 2 years. Every single one. Cross-reference them with actual raids conducted and outcomes. I want to know how many wrong addresses, how many no-knock warrants for non-violent offenses, how many resulted in injury. Torres looks up sharply. You think there's a pattern. It's not a question. Shanice meets her gaze. Webb has submitted 47 warrant requests to my court in the past 14 months. I approved 33 and denied 14. Every single one I denied had problems: insufficient probable cause, unreliable informant testimony, disproportionate force authorization for the alleged crime. And now I find out that someone forged a warrant to raid my home specifically. Yes, Agent Torres. I think there's a pattern. The door opens again and a young FBI agent enters. Agent Torres? We just finished interviewing the officers from the SWAT team. One of them, Officer David Parker, provided extensive testimony. He also mentioned something about a previous incident involving a wrong address raid and deleted bodycam footage. Torres's expression hardens. Get me everything on that case. And I want the names of every officer who participated in raids authorized by warrants submitted by Webb's unit. Shanice tries to sit up more, gritting her teeth against the pain. There's something else. Yesterday in court, I denied a warrant request from Webb's unit. It was for a no-knock raid on an apartment where they claimed a major drug dealer was operating. But their informant had a criminal record, including making false statements to police, and their surveillance photos were taken from too far away to definitively identify anyone. Webb was in the courtroom. He argued with my ruling. He said, and I quote, "Judges who prioritize technicalities over public safety are the real criminals." Shanice pauses, her breathing labored. Less than 12 hours later, 8 of his officers broke down my door and shot me 6 times. The room falls silent as everyone absorbs the timeline. Hayes speaks first, his voice tight with anger. That's not a coincidence. That's retaliation. Dr. Walsh looks up from her analysis. Judge Robinson, there's something else you should see. She pulls up a series of photographs on her laptop. We examined the physical warrant copy that was in Captain Webb's possession during the raid. There are fingerprints on it. Not just his, but several others. We're running them through AFIS now, but one set preliminarily matches a former police officer who was terminated 2 years ago for falsifying evidence. Who? Torres demands. Dr. Walsh checks her notes. Robert Foster. Terminated for planting evidence in a drug case. He sued the department for wrongful termination. Lost and has been working as a private investigator since then. Shanice's eyes narrow. A private investigator with access to court documents and a grudge against the system. Torres, I need you to find out if there's any connection between this Robert Foster and Captain Webb. Torres is already on her phone. I'm getting a warrant for Foster's financial records and phone logs right now. If Webb paid him to create that forged warrant, we'll find the trail. She pauses. Judge Robinson, I have to ask, are you certain you want to be this involved in the investigation? Given what you've been through, no one would question if you needed to step back. Shanice's response is immediate and fierce. Agent Torres, I spent 3 hours in surgery having bullets removed from my body because someone decided that my commitment to constitutional rights made me a target. I'm not stepping back, I'm stepping up. This isn't just about me anymore, this is about every person who's had their door kicked in based on a warrant that wasn't properly vetted. Every family traumatized by paramilitary raids, every community that's learned to fear the police instead of trust them. Hayes puts a hand on her shoulder gently. Easy, Shanice. You need to heal. I'll heal faster, knowing that the people who did this are being held accountable, she replies. And I'll heal better knowing that we're fixing a broken system, so this never happens to anyone else. Now someone get me my laptop. I have 14 warrant denials to review, and I want to know if any of the other ones resulted in raids despite my rulings. While Webb was trying to spin the story, David Parker was doing something that would destroy the captain's career. He was uploading his bodycam footage to a secure server before Webb could order it deleted. By noon, the investigation has expanded exponentially. A conference room at the FBI field office has become a command center, walls covered with photographs, timelines, and document analysis. Agent Torres stands at the head of the table, addressing a room full of federal agents, U.S. Marshals and representatives from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. We are looking at potentially the largest systematic abuse of the warrant system in this district's history. Torres begins, pulling up a presentation on the screen. In the past 24 months, Captain Marcus Webb's SWAT unit has conducted 83 raids. Of those, 23 resulted in wrong addresses, excessive force complaints, or situations where the alleged suspect didn't exist or wasn't present. She clicks to the next slide. Of those 23 problematic raids, 8 targeted individuals who had filed complaints against the police department or testified against officers in court proceedings. A Justice Department attorney, Marcus Fletcher, leans forward. That's not just negligence. That's a pattern of retaliation. Do we have evidence connecting Webb directly to the warrant forgeries? Torres nods. Robert Foster, the former officer turned private investigator, received 5 payments of $5,000 each from an LLC that was created 3 months ago. The LLC's registered agent, Webb's personal attorney. Foster's phone records show 47 calls to Webb's personal cell phone over the past 6 months, including one at 11:00 p.m. the night before Judge Robinson was shot. The screen changes to show bank records. Foster deposited $5,000 the morning after the Robinson raid. We're executing a search warrant on his office right now, Torres continues. But we already have enough for conspiracy charges. What we're building now is the full scope of the conspiracy. How many other warrants were forged? How many other judges' signatures were used without authorization? How many other people were victimized? An FBI agent named Sarah Williams speaks up from the back of the room. We've been contacting victims from the previous 23 raids. 12 have agreed to speak with us so far. The stories are remarkably consistent. Early morning raids, overwhelming force, wrong addresses or no evidence found, and in every case their complaints were dismissed or buried by internal affairs. Fletcher makes a note. We'll be filing a pattern and practice investigation into the entire department. But our immediate priority is the criminal case against Webb, Foster, and anyone else involved in this conspiracy. He looks at Torres. What's Judge Robinson's status? Still in ICU, but improving rapidly. The doctors are amazed by her resilience. She's already started working from her hospital bed, reviewing case files and identifying potential additional fraudulent warrants. Torres pulls up a photo of Shanice in her hospital bed, laptop open, looking exhausted but determined. She's identified 6 other warrants that have signature irregularities similar to the one used to raid her home. The door bursts open and a young agent rushes in, slightly out of breath. We found it. In Foster's office, we found everything. He sets a cardboard box on the table, pulling out its contents, a high-resolution scanner, photo editing software, and this the agent holds up a USB drive with over 40 signed warrants from various judges, scanned and saved as templates. There's also a ledger documenting payments for each forgery. Foster kept receipts of everything, including emails with Webb discussing specific targets. Torres allows herself a small smile. He kept evidence of his own crimes. The young agent grins. Better. He kept evidence of Webb's crimes. There are emails dating back 11 months where Webb specifically requests warrants for addresses of people who filed complaints against the department. In one email, he literally writes, quote, "Judge Robinson denied my warrant for the Garcia raid. Time to remind her that public safety requires judicial cooperation," end quote. The room erupts in controlled fury. Fletcher's face has gone pale. That's consciousness of guilt. That's premeditation. That's a federal civil rights conspiracy with malice aforethought. Torres, how fast can we move on arrests? We already have arrest warrants prepared for Webb and Foster, Torres replies. We're executing them simultaneously this afternoon. But there's more. The ledger shows payments from 3 other officers in Webb's unit. They knew about the forgeries and paid Foster to create warrants that would justify raids they couldn't get approved legitimately. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, Fletcher asks. Her name appears in the ledger? Torres shakes her head. Surprisingly, no. Lieutenant Morrison seems to have been genuinely unaware of the forgery scheme. She's guilty of not questioning obvious irregularities and following unlawful orders, but there's no evidence she was part of the conspiracy itself. She'll face departmental discipline and possibly charges related to the shooting, but she's not part of the forgery ring. Back at the hospital, Shanice is on a video call with the Chief Judge of the Federal District Court, Judge Patricia Anderson. Patricia, I need you to issue an order suspending all pending warrants issued based on applications from Webb's unit until they can be individually reviewed, Shanice says, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. Judge Anderson nods grimly. Already done. I've also ordered a comprehensive audit of all warrants issued in the past 2 years. If there are other forgeries, we'll find them. Shanice, I have to ask, are you sure you're up for this? You should be focused on healing, not conducting an investigation. Shanice's response is firm. Patricia, someone shot me 6 times in my own home because I was doing my job properly. They forged a judicial signature to manufacture probable cause for an illegal raid. If I don't fight this, if I don't use my position and my knowledge to fix this broken system, then what was the point of becoming a judge in the first place? I didn't take this oath to rubber stamp warrant requests. I took it to uphold the Constitution, especially when it's inconvenient for law enforcement. Judge Anderson smiles sadly. You always were the most principled person in this court. All right, I'm authorizing you to work on this investigation in whatever capacity you're able, though I'm ordering you to rest as much as your stubborn personality will allow. And Shanice, I'm proud of you. What you're doing matters. After the call ends, Judge Hayes enters the room with another visitor, Dr. Sarah Bennett, the trauma surgeon who operated on Shanice. Judge Robinson, Dr. Bennett says with a mixture of admiration and exasperation, you're supposed to be resting, not conducting federal investigations from your ICU bed. Shanice manages a weak smile. Doctor, you removed 3 bullets from my body and saved my life. The least I can do is make sure those bullets lead to justice. Besides, thinking about the case distracts me from the pain. Dr. Bennett checks Shanice's vitals on the monitors. Your blood pressure is elevated. Your heart rate is higher than I'd like. You're pushing yourself too hard. I understand why, but you survived being shot 6 times. Don't undo my surgical work by giving yourself a heart attack from stress. Shanice nods reluctantly. I'll rest, but first, I need to know, Robert, has the audit turned up any other suspicious warrants? Hayes opens his laptop. 14 so far, and they're only through the first 6 months of records. All of them have the same pattern, signatures that don't quite match the judge's actual handwriting, formatting irregularities, and in several cases the same coffee stain pattern that appeared on your warrant. Whoever created these used the same source template repeatedly. Shanice leans back against her pillows, processing this information. 14 fraudulent warrants that we know of so far, each one representing a violation of someone's constitutional rights, each one a family traumatized, a home invaded, lives disrupted based on lies. Her voice hardens. I want every single victim contacted. I want them to know that what happened to them wasn't legal, wasn't justified, and that the people responsible are being held accountable. The door opens and Agent Torres enters, her expression grim but satisfied. Judge Robinson, I wanted to tell you personally. We just arrested Captain Marcus Webb and Robert Foster. Webb was attempting to flee, actually had a suitcase packed, and was heading to the airport when we picked him up. Foster was at his office shredding documents when our team arrived. He's being charged with destruction of evidence in addition to the conspiracy charges. Shanice closes her eyes briefly, letting the news sink in. It's a start. But Torres, I need you to promise me something. This investigation doesn't stop with Webb and Foster. I want every officer who knew about the forgeries charged. I want every supervisor who ignored complaints held accountable. And I want systemic reforms that ensure this can never happen again. Torres meets her gaze steadily. Judge, I give you my word. This is just the beginning. By the time we're done, the entire department is going to be reformed from the top down. Hayes adds, and the federal judiciary is implementing new warrant verification protocols. Every warrant will now require digital signature verification, video confirmation of the judge's identity, and independent address verification before execution. It's being called the Robinson Protocol. Despite her pain and exhaustion, Shanice smiles. Good. If my being shot in my own home leads to changes that protect others, then maybe almost dying will mean something. Now, if you'll all excuse me, my surgeon is glaring at me, and I suspect she's about to either medicate me into unconsciousness or physically remove my laptop. Dr. Bennett nods firmly. Both, actually. Everyone out. My patient needs to rest before she undoes all my hard work. As the room clears, Shanice has one more thought. Robert, before you go, one more thing. I want a list of every person who was wrongly raided because of these forged warrants. Names, addresses, outcomes. They deserve to know the truth, and they deserve compensation for what they've been through. Hayes nods. Already being compiled. I'll have it for you tomorrow. Now rest. Justice can wait 12 hours while you heal. Alone in her room, Shanice finally allows herself to feel the full weight of what happened. The terror of waking to her door being smashed in. The desperate confusion of trying to comply while being told she was resisting. The explosion of gunfire. The certainty, in that moment, that she was going to die in her own living room. But underneath the trauma, there's something else. Determination. She survived, and she's going to make damn sure that her survival leads to change. The warrant that authorized the raid on Judge Robinson's home had been signed by a judge in another county who later claimed he never saw it. Someone had forged a judicial signature. And Judge Robinson was about to find out who. 3 days later, Shanice is moved from the ICU to a private room. She's still in significant pain, but her remarkable recovery has amazed the medical staff. What they don't know is that every hour she's awake, she's working, poring over documents, video calling with investigators, building the case that will not only prosecute Webb and his co-conspirators, but dismantle the system that allowed them to operate. Agent Torres arrives early in the morning with news. Judge Robinson, we've completed the analysis of all warrants submitted by Webb's unit over the past 2 years. The results are worse than we thought. She opens her tablet and pulls up a detailed spreadsheet. Of 147 warrants submitted, 41 have evidence of forgery or manipulation. 41. That means more than a quarter of all their raids were based on fraudulent documents. Shanice feels cold anger settling in her chest. 41 families, 41 homes invaded illegally. How many people were injured? Torres scrolls through the data. 18 people were injured during these raids. 3 required hospitalization, not counting you. 1 was an elderly man with dementia who had a heart attack during the raid and nearly died. Another was a young mother whose infant was in the room when flashbangs were deployed. The baby has permanent hearing damage. Show me everything, Shanice says, her voice steady but hard as steel. I want to see every case, every victim, every outcome. Torres begins displaying case files one by one. Each tells a story of constitutional violations, excessive force, and lives torn apart by illegal police actions. Judge Hayes enters carrying a thick folder. Shanice, I have the preliminary forensic report on the warrant that authorized the raid on your home. He sits heavily beside her bed. It's worse than we thought. The warrant wasn't just forged, it was specifically tailored to ensure a violent confrontation. What do you mean? Shanice asks sharply. Hayes opens the folder. The warrant application described you as a high-level drug trafficker with a history of violence and weapons possession. It authorized no-knock entry with full SWAT deployment. The fake informant statement claimed you had threatened to shoot any police who approached your home. Shanice's eyes widen with horror and rage. They manufactured a justification to kill me. They didn't just want to raid my home, they wanted to create a scenario where shooting me would be considered justified. Torres leans forward. That's exactly what the evidence suggests. Webb knew that if he described you as armed and dangerous, his team would enter with maximum force and minimal restraint. When you made any movement, even adjusting your balance to avoid falling, it could be interpreted as reaching for a weapon. He set you up to be killed, and he made sure the paperwork would justify it. This wasn't just retaliation. This was attempted murder dressed up as law enforcement. Hayes nods grimly. The U.S. Attorney is upgrading the charges against Webb. We're adding attempted murder of a federal official, conspiracy to commit murder, and deprivation of rights under color of law. With the evidence we have, he's looking at life in prison without parole. And Foster? Torres asks. Life as well. He knew exactly what Webb intended when he created that warrant. His emails show he expressed concern that the description was too extreme, that it would obviously lead to violence. Webb's response was, quote, "That's the point." Shanice closes her eyes. processing the magnitude of the conspiracy. How many others knew? Were any other officers aware that Webb was targeting me specifically? Torres pulls up another document. Lieutenant Morrison claims she didn't know about the forged warrant or Webb's specific intent to target you. Her story is that she was handed the warrant that morning and told it was a standard drug raid. We're still investigating, but there's no evidence she was part of the murder conspiracy. However, Officer David Parker has provided testimony that several team members expressed concerns about the address and the description of the target before the raid. What kind of concerns? Shanice demands. Parker states that Officer James Sullivan pointed out that 3240 Oakwood Drive is in an upscale residential neighborhood, not typically associated with drug trafficking. Officer Lisa Carter noted that the alleged drug dealer's description didn't match typical trafficking profiles, and Officer Thomas Wright actually looked up the address and discovered it belonged to a federal judge. He reported this to Lieutenant Morrison. And Morrison did what? Shanice's voice is sharp. According to Parker, Morrison told Wright that the warrant had been verified by command staff, and they were to execute it as written. When Wright pressed the issue, Webb himself intervened and told him that questioning warrants in the field was insubordination. Wright backed down. Torres adds, Wright has now come forward and is cooperating fully with the investigation. He says he's haunted by the fact that he knew something was wrong, but followed orders anyway. Shanice is silent for a long moment. I want to meet with the officers who had concerns, not to prosecute them, but to understand how a system can make good people ignore their instincts. If we're going to reform this, we need to understand how the culture of obedience to authority overrides common sense and constitutional principles. Torres considers this. It's unusual, but I can arrange interviews under controlled circumstances. It might actually be valuable for the investigation. These officers can speak to the culture of intimidation and retaliation that prevented them from speaking up. Judge Robinson had denied 14 of Captain Webb's warrant requests in the past year. Each time, she'd documented why: insufficient probable cause, unreliable informants, constitutional violations. Webb hadn't just made a mistake. He'd come for revenge. 5 days after the shooting, Shanice is finally cleared to leave the hospital. She's still in significant pain, moving slowly with a cane. But her doctors have admitted that keeping her confined is doing more harm than good. Against their better judgment, they discharge her to the protective custody of the U.S. Marshals. But she doesn't go to a safe house. Instead, Chief Deputy Marshal James Washington drives her directly to the federal courthouse. Judge Robinson, Washington says carefully, the doctors cleared you for light activity. I'm not sure walking into the courthouse 7 days after being shot 6 times qualifies as light activity. Shanice adjusts her position in the seat, wincing. Deputy, someone forged judicial warrants to justify illegal raids on at least 41 homes. 3 of those raids resulted in hospitalizations. My raid resulted in 6 gunshot wounds. If I don't use my position to fix this immediately, more people will be hurt. That's not light activity, that's essential activity. Inside the courthouse, news of her arrival spreads instantly. Federal judges, clerks, attorneys, and staff members line the hallways as she makes her slow, painful way to her chambers. Some are crying. Others applaud quietly, respectfully. Judge Patricia Anderson meets her at the entrance to the judicial wing, her eyes glistening. Shanice, you stubborn, brilliant woman. You should be home recovering. Shanice manages a tired smile. Patricia, my home has 6 bullet holes in the walls and is still a crime scene. I have nowhere else to go but here. In her chambers, Shanice finds her desk covered with flowers, cards, and messages of support. But she ignores all of it, focusing instead on the stack of files that Hayes has prepared. 41 cases, 41 victims. She opens the first file and begins reading. The victim's name is Marcus Thompson, a 67-year-old black veteran with dementia who lived alone. The forged warrant described him as a dangerous arms dealer. When the SWAT team broke down his door at 6 a.m., Marcus was confused and terrified. He reached for his phone to call for help. The officers thought he was reaching for a weapon. They tased him. He had a heart attack. He survived, but he now lives in a nursing home, too traumatized to return to his own home. Shanice reads the file 3 times, memorizing every detail. Then she picks up her phone and calls Agent Torres. "I want to meet Marcus Thompson. Today, if possible." Torres hesitates. "Judge, he has severe dementia. He might not understand who you are or why you're visiting." "I don't care if he understands," Shanice replies. "I need him to know that someone in the system cares about what happened to him. And I need to look in the eyes of another victim to remind myself why this matters." 2 hours later, Shanice sits in a nursing home activity room across from Marcus Thompson. He's a thin, fragile man with cloudy eyes and trembling hands. He doesn't recognize her, doesn't understand why she's there, but when she gently takes his hand and says, "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. What they did was wrong, and I'm going to make sure it never happens to anyone else," something flickers in his expression. A moment of clarity, perhaps, or just a response to human kindness. "Thank you," he whispers. "I was so scared." Shanice has to excuse herself, finding a private corner where she can cry without disturbing the other residents. Washington stands guard at a respectful distance, giving her space to grieve for Marcus, for herself, for all the victims of Webb's crimes. When she returns to the courthouse that afternoon, her resolve has hardened into something unbreakable. Judge Hayes is waiting in her chambers with news. The grand jury has returned indictments. Webb is being charged with attempted murder of a federal official, conspiracy to commit murder, deprivation of rights under color of law, and 41 counts of conspiracy to forge judicial documents. Foster is charged as a co-conspirator on all counts. Additionally, we're bringing charges against 3 other officers who knowingly participated in raids based on warrants they knew or should have known were fraudulent. When does the arraignment happen? Tomorrow morning. Webb will be brought before Judge Anderson, since obviously you're recused. The U.S. Attorney expects him to plead not guilty and request bail. Torres adds, "We're opposing bail strenuously. Webb has means, motive, and opportunity to flee. He also poses a potential danger to witnesses, particularly you." "I want to be there," Shanice says. "At the arraignment, I want Webb to see me alive, standing, and absolutely committed to his prosecution." The next morning, Shanice sits at her desk, still moving stiffly from her injuries, watching the arraignment on a large monitor. Webb is led into the courtroom in shackles, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looks diminished somehow, smaller than he seemed when he was screaming orders in her living room with a gun in his hand. Judge Anderson reads the charges in her clear, firm voice. "Captain Marcus Webb, you are charged with attempted murder of a federal official, conspiracy to commit murder, 41 counts of conspiracy to forge judicial documents, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Webb's attorney, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, stands. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. We'll be filing motions to dismiss based on qualified immunity and lack of specific intent." Judge Anderson's expression doesn't change. Motions can be filed through proper channels. Now, regarding bail. The U.S. Attorney stands. "Your Honor, the government strongly opposes bail. The defendant poses a substantial flight risk. He was apprehended at the airport, attempting to leave the country with $50,000 in cash. He also poses a danger to the community, specifically to witnesses in this case. The defendant orchestrated a conspiracy to murder a federal judge. There is no condition of release that can adequately protect the public or ensure his appearance at trial." Webb's attorney argues passionately for bail, claiming his client is a decorated law enforcement officer with deep community ties and no prior criminal record. But Judge Anderson is unmoved. Given the severity of the charges, the evidence of flight risk, and the potential danger to witnesses and the community, bail is denied. The defendant will be held without bond pending trial. Webb's face goes pale, then red with rage. He tries to speak, but his attorney silences him with a hand on his arm. In her chambers, Shanice watches as Webb is led away. She feels no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a deep, weary determination to see this through. Hayes enters quietly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Shanice admits. "But we're not done." I want to meet with every victim of these illegal raids. I want to hear their stories, understand their trauma, and help them understand that what happened to them wasn't legal, wasn't justified, and that the system failed them. But more importantly, I want them to know we're fixing the system so it doesn't fail anyone else. Torres joins them, pulling up a document on her tablet. We've identified 38 of the 41 victims. 3 have moved out of state, and we're still tracking them down. Of the 38 we've located, 26 have agreed to speak with investigators. 12 are too traumatized or distrustful of the system to participate. Shanice nods slowly. I want to reach out to those 12 personally, not as a judge, but as someone who understands exactly what they've been through. If they're willing to talk to me, I want to listen. And if they're not willing, I want to make sure they know that reforms are happening, whether they participate or not. Their trauma matters, even if they can't bear to relive it. The 3 of them spend the rest of the afternoon reviewing case files, planning interviews, and coordinating with the various federal agencies involved in the investigation. By evening, Shanice is exhausted, her wounds aching, but her mind is clear and focused. This is just the beginning, she tells Hayes and Torres as they prepare to leave. Webb's prosecution is important, but it's not enough. We need systemic change. We need reforms that prevent any police department from operating with this level of impunity ever again. Hayes smiles. You're already working on that, aren't you? The Robinson Protocol. Shanice pulls up a document on her computer. More than a protocol. I'm drafting a comprehensive federal standard for warrant execution, independent address verification by at least 3 sources. Mandatory body cam activation with automatic cloud backup that can't be deleted by field officers. Judicial signature verification through secure digital systems. Prohibition of no-knock raids except in the most extreme circumstances, with approval required from a federal judge. And most importantly, mandatory reporting of all wrong address raids, excessive force complaints, and officer-involved shootings to a federal database that tracks patterns. For 15 years, Shanice Robinson had been the judge who decided if police had enough evidence to invade someone's home. Now she was about to become the evidence that would dismantle the entire system. 2 weeks after the shooting, Shanice returns to her courtroom for the first time. The gallery is packed with attorneys, other judges, reporters, and victims of Webb's illegal raids. She moves slowly to the bench, still using her cane, still clearly in pain. But when she takes her seat and looks out at the assembled crowd, her voice is strong and clear. This court is now in session. We're here today for a preliminary hearing in United States versus Marcus Webb and Robert Foster. But before we begin the legal proceedings, I want to address something that goes beyond any individual case. She pauses, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. 3 weeks ago, I was shot 6 times in my own home by police officers executing a warrant that was forged, falsified, and designed to justify deadly force. I am alive today because of skilled surgeons, because the bullets missed vital organs by millimeters, and because I am extraordinarily lucky. But luck should not be the difference between life and death when citizens interact with law enforcement. I have spent 15 years on this bench reviewing warrant applications, weighing evidence, and deciding whether the government has met its constitutional burden to invade the sanctity of someone's home. I have approved thousands of warrants and denied hundreds. Every denial was based on constitutional principles. I never denied a warrant because I was soft on crime. I denied warrants because the Constitution requires it. Shanice leans forward slightly. Captain Webb and his co-conspirators decided that my commitment to constitutional principles made me an enemy. They forged judicial signatures. They manufactured false evidence. They created a fictitious scenario designed to justify killing me in my own home. And they succeeded in shooting me 6 times. What they didn't succeed in doing was silencing me, intimidating me, or making me question whether constitutional rights matter more than police convenience. She gestures to the victims seated in the gallery. But I'm not the only victim here. At least 41 families were terrorized by raids based on forged warrants. An elderly veteran with dementia was tased and suffered a heart attack. A mother's infant suffered permanent hearing damage from flashbangs deployed without justification. Innocent people were held at gunpoint, their homes destroyed, their sense of security shattered. The U.S. Attorney, Michelle Hampton, stands. Your Honor, the government wants to emphasize that this case is not about law enforcement generally. It's about specific officers who violated their oaths, betrayed public trust, and committed serious federal crimes. The vast majority of police officers serve honorably and respect constitutional boundaries. Shanice nods. I agree. And that's precisely why prosecution and reform are so important. When we allow unconstitutional policing to go unchecked, we don't just harm the direct victims, we harm every honorable officer whose reputation is tainted by the crimes of the corrupt. Webb's attorney rises. Your Honor, with all respect, I must object to these comments. My client is presumed innocent. This seems less like a judicial proceeding and more like a prosecution speech. Shanice turns her gaze to him. I am not the judge who will try your client's case. I'm recused due to my status as a victim, but I am still a federal judge, and I have every right to speak about constitutional principles and systemic reforms. Nothing I've said prejudges your client's guilt or innocence. I've simply stated facts. Warrants were forged, raids were conducted based on those forged warrants, and people were harmed. Those are documented facts, not opinions. Judge Anderson, sitting in the gallery, stands. Your Honor, the federal judiciary for this district has unanimously endorsed what we're calling the Robinson Protocol. Every judge has signed on to comprehensive warrant reforms. We're also implementing quarterly reviews of all law enforcement agencies' warrant compliance. And we're creating a victims' compensation fund for those harmed by the illegal raids. Shanice nods her thanks. These reforms include mandatory independent address verification, digital signature authentication, body cam requirements with automatic cloud backup, and severe penalties for officers who knowingly execute invalid warrants. Additionally, all no-knock raids must now be approved by a federal judge, and only in circumstances where there is specific, credible evidence of immediate danger. Officer David Parker stands in the gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? Shanice recognizes him. Officer Parker, you're one of the officers present during the raid on my home. Please proceed. Parker's voice shakes. I want to publicly apologize to you and to every victim of these illegal raids. I followed orders when I should have refused them. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. But I'm committed to being part of the solution. But the most damaging testimony came from someone Webb thought would never speak. His own wife, who'd overheard him on the phone the night before the raid saying that Judge is about to learn what happens when you block my warrants. The trial of Marcus Webb begins 6 months after the shooting. The courtroom is packed with media, victims, police officers, and civil rights activists. Judge William Grant presides, known for running an efficient courtroom and having zero tolerance for theatrics. The prosecution's case is devastating from the very first witness. Agent Torres takes the stand and methodically walks the jury through the investigation. She presents bank records showing 5 payments of $5,000 from Webb to Robert Foster. She shows phone records documenting 47 calls between them. She displays emails where Webb specifically identifies Judge Robinson as a target. But it's the body cam footage that truly horrifies the jury. Officer David Parker's camera captured everything in crystal clear resolution. The jury watches as Shanice descends her stairs in her robe and pajamas, hands immediately raised. They hear her clear voice. There's been a mistake. I'm alone here. I'm not armed. They watch as she stands motionless, hands high, palms visible and empty. They hear Webb screaming contradictory orders, and then they see it, the slight buckle of her leg, the minute shift of weight, less than 2 inches of movement, followed immediately by Webb's shout of gun and the explosion of gunfire. The courtroom is silent as the footage shows Shanice falling, blood spreading across her robe, massive holes erupting in the wall behind her. The jury watches Officer Parker lower his weapon with shaking hands, hears his whispered captain, "There's no gun." Several jurors are crying openly. The prosecutor pauses the video on a frame showing Shanice on the floor, blood pooling around her, hands still raised. The jury needs to understand something crucial. Judge Robinson maintained compliance throughout this entire encounter. Her hands were visible and empty from the moment she appeared until the moment she fell. She was shot 6 times for the crime of losing her balance. Officer David Parker's testimony is particularly powerful. He describes the culture of intimidation in Webb's unit, the pressure to never question warrants or tactics, the retaliation against officers who raised concerns. When asked why he saved his body cam footage, Parker's answer is simple and devastating. Because I knew Captain Webb would order it deleted. He'd done it before after every raid that went wrong. I knew this was different because we'd shot a federal judge, but I also knew that made it more important to preserve the evidence. So I uploaded it to a secure server before he could stop me. The prosecution's medical expert, Dr. Sarah Bennett, takes the stand to describe Shanice's injuries in clinical detail. 3 gunshot wounds. The shoulder wound fractured her scapula. The leg wound shattered her femur, requiring surgical repair with plates and screws. The abdominal wound perforated her intestines in 3 places, causing massive internal bleeding and requiring emergency surgery. Dr. Bennett shows the jury surgical photographs. Several jurors look away. Based on the rate of blood loss from the abdominal wound, she testifies, Judge Robinson had 20 to 30 minutes maximum to live. She would have bled out in her living room if paramedics had arrived even 5 minutes later. Robert Foster testifies next, having accepted a plea deal. His testimony is methodical and damning. He describes receiving a call from Webb at 11 p.m. on the night before the raid. Webb told him he needed a warrant for 3240 Oakwood Drive, that the target was a black woman in her 40s, and that the warrant needed to justify maximum force. Foster admits he questioned why Webb was targeting a residential address in an upscale neighborhood. Webb's response was that the target had embarrassed him in court and needed to learn a lesson. Foster describes creating the forged warrant using scanned signatures. He describes manufacturing a fictitious informant statement claiming the target was armed and dangerous. He describes being paid $5,000, and he describes delivering the finished warrant to Webb at 4 a.m., 1 hour before the raid. When asked if he knew Webb intended to use deadly force, Foster's answer is unequivocal. He told me the warrant needed to create a situation where his team would be justified in shooting if the target made any movement that could be interpreted as threatening. I knew exactly what he was planning. The most powerful moment comes when Shanice herself takes the stand. She moves slowly to the witness box, still using a cane, and is sworn in. The prosecutor's direct examination is brief, but devastating. Judge Robinson, please tell the jury what happened on the morning of March 15th. Shanice takes a deep breath and begins. I woke to the sound of my door being destroyed. I heard men shouting. I was terrified, but I knew I needed to comply. So I went downstairs with my hands up, calling out that I was alone and unarmed. The department's own Internal Affairs Division would become their worst enemy. When federal agents seized their files, they found evidence that Webb's superiors knew about false warrants and authorized them anyway. Shanice continues her testimony, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I told them I was a federal judge. I told them they had the wrong address. I told them this was 3240, not 3420, but Captain Webb kept screaming at me. He told me to show my hands even though my hands were already up, clearly visible, with nothing in them. I was so confused. I didn't know what he wanted me to do differently. Her voice breaks slightly. Then my legs started to give out. I'd been standing with my hands up for what felt like forever, and my muscles were shaking. I shifted my weight maybe 2 inches to keep from falling, and that's when he shouted gun and they started shooting. The courtroom is absolutely silent. Shanice looks directly at the jury. There was no gun. There was never a gun. I'm a federal judge. I don't own firearms. I've never owned firearms. I was in my own home in my pajamas with my hands raised, begging them to check their warrant. And they shot me 6 times. 3 bullets hit me. 3 more destroyed my wall. If any of those bullets had been 2 inches to the left, I wouldn't be here today. I would have died on my living room floor, and Captain Webb would have justified it by saying I made a threatening movement. The cross-examination is brief and ineffective. Webb's attorney tries to suggest that in the chaos and darkness, his client reasonably believed she posed a threat, but Shanice's response is devastating. Counselor, your client created the chaos. He forged a warrant. He described me as armed and dangerous based on lies. He executed a raid at 5 a.m. when he knew I'd be asleep and disoriented. He ignored my statements that I was a federal judge. He screamed contradictory orders. And then he used my attempt to maintain my balance as justification to shoot me. That's not reasonable. That's premeditated attempted murder. The defense's case is weak by comparison. Character witnesses for Webb testify about his years of service, but the prosecution's cross-examination is withering. Under questioning, these witnesses admit that Webb had a reputation for cutting corners, for prioritizing arrest numbers over constitutional compliance, for retaliating against anyone who questioned his methods. One witness, a retired captain, admits under oath that he'd warned Webb years ago that his aggressive tactics would eventually result in tragedy. The most damaging witness for the defense is Webb's own wife, Patricia Webb. She takes the stand reluctantly, clearly conflicted. The prosecutor asks her about the night before the raid. "Mrs. Webb, did you overhear a phone conversation between your husband and anyone else on the evening of March 14th? Patricia's voice is barely audible. "Yes." "Can you tell the jury what you heard?" She takes a deep breath. "Marcus was on the phone in his study. I was walking past and heard him say something about Judge Robinson. He said, 'That judge is about to learn what happens when you block my warrants.' Then he laughed and said something about teaching her respect for law enforcement." The courtroom erupts. Judge Grant calls for order. Webb's face has gone white. His attorney jumps up. "Your Honor, I move for a mistrial. This testimony is hearsay and highly prejudicial." Judge Grant considers. The statement is not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather to show the defendant's state of mind. The objection is overruled. "Mrs. Webb, please continue." Patricia wipes tears from her eyes. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. Marcus was always complaining about judges who denied his warrants. I thought it was just venting. But the next morning, when I heard that Judge Robinson had been shot during a raid Marcus led, I realized what he'd meant, and I knew I had to tell the truth. After 2 weeks of testimony, closing arguments begin. The prosecutor is forceful and clear. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a man who decided that constitutional oversight was an inconvenience to be eliminated, rather than a principle to be respected. Captain Marcus Webb didn't just shoot Judge Shanice Robinson. He conspired to murder her. He paid Robert Foster to forge a judicial warrant. He manufactured a scenario designed to justify deadly force. He ignored clear evidence that he was raiding the wrong address and targeting the wrong person. And when Judge Robinson stood in her own home with her hands raised, complying with every order, he shot her 6 times. That's not law enforcement. That's attempted murder. The defense's closing is a desperate attempt to cast doubt, but the evidence is overwhelming. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returns. On all counts, attempted murder of a federal official, conspiracy to commit murder, 41 counts of forgery, deprivation of civil rights, we find the defendant guilty. Webb's face crumples. In the gallery, victims begin to cry. Shanice, watching via video feed from her chambers, closes her eyes and allows herself one moment of relief. But Shanice Robinson wasn't satisfied with just sending Webb to prison. She was about to use her judicial authority to rewrite the rules for every no-knock raid in America. Sentencing day arrives 3 months later. Judge Grant's courtroom is packed once again. Webb is led in wearing prison orange, looking gaunt and defeated. But before sentencing, Judge Grant has allowed victims to make impact statements. One by one, they approach the microphone. Marcus Thompson's daughter speaks first, her father sitting beside her in his wheelchair. "My father was a decorated veteran who served this country with honor. He came home from Vietnam with PTSD and survivor's guilt, but he built a good life. He was independent, living in his own home, managing his condition. Then your SWAT team broke down his door at 6 a.m. screaming and pointing guns. My father, who has dementia, thought he was back in the war. He reached for his phone to call for help, and they tased him. He had a heart attack." Her voice breaks. "He'll never live independently again. He's terrified of loud noises. He has nightmares every night. You didn't just raid his home. You destroyed what was left of his life." A young woman named Jennifer Harris speaks next. "I'm 24 years old. I have a 10-month-old daughter. When your team raided my apartment looking for my ex-boyfriend who I'd broken up with months earlier and who never lived with me, your officers threw flashbangs into my living room. My daughter was 6 feet away from one when it exploded. She was 6 months old. She now has permanent hearing loss in her left ear. She'll need hearing aids for the rest of her life. All because you couldn't be bothered to verify that my ex-boyfriend had moved out months before. All because you forged a warrant rather than do actual police work. One after another, victims tell their stories. By the time the 10th person has spoken, several jurors from the trial are in the gallery crying. Webb keeps his head down, refusing to look at any of them. Finally, Judge Grant speaks. Captain Marcus Webb, you have been found guilty of some of the most serious crimes an officer of the law can commit. You violated your oath. You betrayed the public trust. You weaponized the legal system against those who dared to hold you accountable to constitutional standards. And you very nearly murdered a federal judge in her own home. The court has reviewed the sentencing guidelines, the pre-sentence report, and the impact statements. The guidelines recommend 25 years to life. The prosecution has requested life without parole. The defense has requested the minimum sentence. I have considered all of these positions carefully. Judge Grant pauses, looking directly at Webb. What you did wasn't just a crime. It was an attack on the constitutional order itself. When citizens cannot trust that warrants are legitimate, when they cannot trust that judges' decisions will be respected, when they cannot feel safe in their own homes from illegal government intrusion, the entire system of justice collapses. You didn't just harm Judge Robinson and the other victims. You harmed every citizen who depends on constitutional protections. For the crime of attempted murder of a federal official, I sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole. For the conspiracy charges, I sentence you to 25 years to run concurrently. For each of the 41 counts of forgery and deprivation of civil rights, I sentence you to 5 years each, also concurrent. You will spend the rest of your natural life in federal prison. You will never again wear a badge. You will never again have power over another human being. Court is adjourned. As Webb is led away, Shanice enters the courtroom through a side door. She's still using a cane, but moving better now. The victims see her and several rush over. "Thank you," Marcus Thompson's daughter says through tears. "Thank you for not letting this be swept under the rug. Thank you for fighting for all of us." Shanice embraces her gently. "I'm so sorry for what happened to your father. I'm sorry it took me being shot for the system to finally pay attention to what was happening. But I promise you, we're making changes. This will never happen again." That afternoon, Shanice holds a press conference on the courthouse steps. She's surrounded by Judge Anderson, Judge Hayes, Agent Torres, and representatives from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Today's sentencing of former Captain Marcus Webb brings justice for 41 victims of illegal raids, Shanice begins. But justice for past wrongs isn't enough. We must ensure these wrongs never happen again. That's why I'm announcing the Robinson Protocol, a comprehensive set of reforms that will fundamentally change how warrants are issued and executed in this country. She pulls out a document. These reforms include mandatory independent address verification by at least 3 sources before any raid, digital authentication of all judicial signatures to prevent forgery, mandatory body cam activation with automatic cloud backup that cannot be altered or deleted by field officers, a federal database tracking all wrong address raids, excessive force complaints, and officer-involved shootings to identify patterns of abuse. And most significantly, no-knock raids will now require approval from a federal judge, not just a county magistrate, and only in circumstances where there is specific, credible, documented evidence of immediate danger to life. The Robinson Protocol would be cited in over 400 federal cases in the next 2 years. But its most important impact was something that couldn't be measured in court rulings. It saved lives. 8 months after the shooting, Shanice returns to her home for the first time since that terrible morning. The house has been completely renovated, with one exception. The 6 bullet holes in her living room wall remain, now preserved behind protective glass. A plaque beside them reads, "Evidence of why we must do better. March 15, 2024. Shanice Robinson, federal district judge, shot 6 times in her own home by police executing a forged warrant. These holes remain as a reminder that constitutional rights are not suggestions, and that badges do not grant permission to violate the sacred space of our homes. She stands in her living room, looking at the preserved destruction, and feels a complex mix of emotions. Trauma, yes. The memory of that morning will never fully fade, but also pride. She survived, she fought back, and she created lasting change. Chief Deputy Washington, who still provides her security, stands nearby. "Ready to come back home, Judge?" Shanice nods slowly. "As ready as I'll ever be. This is still my home. I won't let what Webb did take that away from me." That evening, Shanice sits in her study, reviewing reports on the Robinson Protocol's implementation. The statistics are remarkable. In the 8 months since the reforms were enacted, no-knock raids have decreased by 73% nationwide. Wrong address raids have dropped by 89%. Not a single person has been killed during a warrant execution in jurisdictions that have adopted the full protocol. The mandatory address verification alone has prevented 42 raids on incorrect addresses. 42 families who didn't have their doors kicked in, who didn't experience the terror that Shanice and so many others endured. Her phone rings. It's Judge Hayes. "Shanice, I wanted to let you know the Victims' Compensation Fund just processed its final payment. All 41 victims have received compensation. Marcus Thompson's family got $3 million. Jennifer Harris's family got $2.5 million for her daughter's permanent hearing loss. Every single person who was harmed by Webb's crimes has been financially compensated. It doesn't undo the trauma." Shanice replies, "But it's something. It's acknowledgement that what happened to them mattered, that the system failed them, and that we're trying to make it right." The next morning, Shanice returns to her courtroom. It's been 8 months since she last presided over proceedings. Her clerks have prepared meticulously, and there's a full docket waiting. But the first case of the day is special. It's a warrant application from a newly reformed SWAT unit, now under completely new leadership. Officer David Parker, who saved the body cam footage that convicted Webb, has been promoted to sergeant and is now responsible for warrant applications and oversight. Sergeant Parker stands before her bench holding a warrant application. "Your Honor, we're requesting authorization for a search warrant at 742 Riverside Avenue. We have surveillance footage showing drug transactions, testimony from 3 independent confidential informants whose reliability we've verified, and property records confirming the address and the name of the resident who matches our target. We verified the address with the City Assessor's Office, the Postal Service, and visual confirmation. We're requesting daytime execution with knock and announce protocol. No tactical team deployment is requested, as we have no evidence the suspect is armed or dangerous." Shanice reviews the application carefully, asking detailed questions about each piece of evidence, each source, each verification step. After 15 minutes, she signs the warrant. "This is how it should be done, Sergeant Parker. Thorough investigation, verified information, proportional response. This is constitutional policing." Parker smiles. "Thank you, Your Honor. You taught us that. You and the Robinson Protocol. We're not perfect yet. But we're learning that doing it right isn't just legal, it's actually more effective. When people trust us, they cooperate. When raids are based on solid evidence, we find what we're looking for. Accountability makes us better at our jobs, not worse." Later that day, Shanice receives an award from the American Bar Association for her work on judicial reform and constitutional protections. She accepts it via video conference, still not comfortable with large public gatherings. In her acceptance speech, she says, "I didn't choose to become a symbol of constitutional reform. I was shot 6 times for doing my job. But if my trauma can prevent others from experiencing the same violation, then maybe almost dying wasn't meaningless." Constitutional rights aren't abstract concepts. They're the difference between safety and terror, between justice and oppression, between a home as sanctuary and a home as war zone. As the sun sets, Shanice sits on her renovated porch, looking out at her quiet neighborhood. Children play in the street. Neighbors walk their dogs. Life continues, peaceful and normal. Her phone buzzes with a news alert. The headline reads, "National No-Knock Raid Deaths Drop to Historic Low Following Robinson Protocol Implementation." She smiles. a real smile. Perhaps the first since that terrible morning 8 months ago. Chief Deputy Washington approaches with a cup of tea. "You did it, Judge. You changed the system." Shanice shakes her head gently. "We changed the system. Every victim who came forward, every officer like David Parker who chose truth over loyalty, every judge who adopted the reforms, every citizen who demanded better. It wasn't just me." Washington nods. "But you were the catalyst. You survived and you decided to fight rather than hide. That matters." Inside her home, the 6 bullet holes remain preserved behind glass, a permanent reminder of what happened and why it must never happen again. Shanice looks at them one last time before going to bed. Tomorrow she'll return to her courtroom. She'll review warrants with the same meticulous care she always has. She'll deny applications that don't meet constitutional standards, and she'll approve ones that do. She'll do her job, just like she did before. Except now, the system has changed. Now, judges' decisions are respected. Now, warrants are verified. Now, homes are safer. Marcus Webb sits in a federal prison cell, serving life without parole. Robert Foster is in an adjacent facility, also serving life. 3 other officers who participated in the conspiracy serve sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison was fired and banned from law enforcement, but avoided criminal charges. The department itself underwent complete restructuring, with federal oversight that will continue for 10 years. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations with us. Seeing this global community united for accountability and truth proves that our homes should be sacred spaces, protected by law, not violated by it. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories of courage transforming tragedy into lasting change. Until next time, remember that a badge is not a license to invade, a uniform is not a shield for mistakes, and justice delayed is justice denied. Judge Robinson made sure of that. She was shot 6 times in her own home, and instead of being silenced, she became the loudest voice for reform this country has heard in decades. Constitutional rights matter. Your home matters. And no one not ever should experience what Judge Shanice Robinson survived that terrible morning at 5 a.m. when her door came crashing down.